All right, guys, welcome back to the Build Phase podcast here. My name is Greg. I'm joined by Tao Thoma from Respawn Youth. He is the founder and CEO of Respawn Youth. And we're going to dive into what he does at Respawn, who he is, his experience in esports, and kind of the esports landscape that we are in, that we have been in, and where we think we're going and making an impact. So, Tao, I'm going to toss it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about Respawn Youth.
All right. Thanks, Greg, for the introduction. My name's Tao Thoma. I've got a long list of different things, the reason why I got into esports, but it's been a passion of mine throughout my entire life. And I was one of the first graduates in the world with a higher education degree in esports management gaming, which I think is the start of this phase of life of mine. I was a personal trainer for pro and collegiate athletes for over 10 years prior to getting into esports as a career. And I had a couple of spinal surgeries that kind of forced me into an early retirement, but I knew that I wanted to still work with kids. I still wanted to work in that formidable phase, the malleable part where I can kind of help guide them to that next step and go forward with confidence. So that's where we're at. Respawn Youth is a educational esports learning experience. We're a fully STEM accredited program. And we partner with schools and after-school programs, basically building opportunities for kids to learn soft and technical skills through the platform of esports.
That's awesome. I mean, we've gotten close to Respawn recently here at XP League Frisco. Our shared passion in esports, I would say, is League of Legends for sure. I'm wearing my LCS hat. I've got my FlyQuest League is not dead shirt on today because I knew we were going to be, talking a little bit about League of Legends, the youth side of it, things that are going on there. So, I know at Respawn Youth, y'all focus on specifically League of Legends and I believe Valorant, right? Is y'all's two biggest games? Is that correct?
Yeah, we have three curriculums that we utilize, and it's League of Legends and Valorant for Riot Games, and we also have a Rocket League curriculum as well that we go through. The majority of the reason why we focus on titles, not just because we play them, obviously the founding crew, both my partners and I were on the esports team for University of New Haven, where we were getting our degree in esports management. So we were on the varsity team there, and we got along really well. And when we delved into the esports education side, I really wanted to bring them on board as my co-founders. So that's, League of Legends is obviously a passion project for myself, a big hobby of mine, very competitive in that. But, we wanted to tie in titles that were specifically tied to future pathways. And, as we look through all the different titles, we also connected with a lot of higher education institutions, a lot of colleges and universities, and talked to them about where the scholarship dollars are going, where the interest is, where the leagues are, what developers are, most willing to work alongside them as well. And then obviously the pro side and the career path, if they wanted to continue or if they are good enough to continue past that, even though you and I know that the life of a pro gamer is normally in their teens into their early 20s, and then they retire and then go to college. I do have a pipe making more of organic pipeline to make it kind of fit the same timeline as regular traditional sports. But
that's awesome, and I definitely can connect with that dream of wanting to build that pipeline, right? I think ourselves here at XP League and y'all at Respawn, that's kind of our purpose, right? That's kind of outside of just all right, we want to, build these players up. Also, we also want to give them pathways that are not just being players, right? Like you mentioned, bringing in, y'all's focus on, developers like Riot, with Valorant and League of Legends, or Epic with Rocket League, right? There's, developers that support their esports very well. And there's also just a large scene of, career pathways, around those games, right? They're the biggest, production games, or the most viewed games, right? And so there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just the players and the coaches on there, right? And one guy behind computer streaming, right? There's a whole network of people that, put these shows on, and even not just the shows, right? Run the league, run like the programs that the players are in, right? Whether that's, actual coaching or like, health and wellness plans or, mental coaching, all these different things. Like there's so much that, you can do to be in the esports industry. And I think, what's great that y'all are doing specifically is you're not just focusing on like the pro, like, path to pro, right? You're looking at path to colleges, right? Because if you're going to be in some of these more supportive roles, right, you're going to need to learn these professional skills. And a lot of those are going to have to come through, college degrees, right? And there's colleges ready to hand out money and you don't have to be like the top guy, right? Like they want to see like those well-rounded people and stuff, that are going to be able to make an impact at their universities and, beyond that. So I think it's really awesome what y'all are doing in that. And I would certainly love to hear some of the connections y'all are making with, some of your curriculum or, the relationships y'all have built as an organization to kind of enable y'all's players or y'all's lessons towards some of those goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And to speak on your point about like player versus person as well, there's a huge differentiator there. But the majority of, I guess you would say, top tier programs, like you were looking at, like St. Thomas, for instance, or Maryville and whatnot. You have those schools that have the most elite players, and they're normally like bringing on ex-LCS players to be coming into the college. They'll give them full ride scholarships, but those are the exceptions instead of the rule. Like you have the normal run-of-the-mill universities and colleges that are actually wanting some of the players that are in that development phase that are not those top tier challenger grandmaster players instead, because I was actually just talking with the coordinator over at Syracuse University recently, and he was saying we would rather take the person who is less skilled as a player but better teammate, more amenable, more that knows how to communicate, that has those social skills, and then develop them as players in the program instead, because that's what they focus on. They focus on esports in that program. But you can't teach someone humility, right? You can't teach someone the ability to take a situation and de-escalate it if tensions are high and people are flaming each other in game or something like that. That's not something that you can really. That has to be more of the intrinsic values that somebody holds and the characteristics that someone has. And so character development is a big piece of what we do.
Yeah, no, that's that's awesome. And it's certainly one of those things, like with those colleges, right? They might not even have the time to teach on that character development, right? Like if they come in, all right, we've got the character development like down. Now, they're probably going to be more coachable, right? They're going to be the ones that, our coaches and our staffs, that we can get them up to speed on like the game stuff, right? Like we got that, and that's an ever changing, landscape, depending on what game you're playing, right? There's not a lot of constants unless you're playing Rocket League, and they somehow find a way to like break the physics engine like every year, like with new techniques and stuff, right? So no, that's really awesome that y'all are getting to make those collegiate connections as well. And I'm sure Syracuse is not the only college thinking that way, right? I'm sure there's plenty of other ones out there that are saying, yeah, like I want the person that's going to be, coachable, who has like they're a good teammate, they're a good communicator, right? And they're not going to be, your former LCS players who, by the way, probably don't have some of those skills too. If we've seen any of, some of the documentaries that have come out a long time ago, which some of those players are now actually, or were collegiate players after their LCS time as well. And it's awesome that they get, college degrees and stuff, right? But like you're saying, people are ready to take, players that are not just the ones winning every game, right? And that's really awesome to see. Tao, I want to take a step back in your esports journey. So let me just take me through like how you got started, like where did this passion come from? I'm not talking like, all right, I was born like this day or whatever, but when was your esports passion born, and, how did that develop?
So I will give you a little bit of background, because it kind of does, give you a deeper dive understanding of my life and the trajectory that I've had. So I grew up in Hawaii, and if you know about video games and the ping, the packet loss and whatnot, where the
Yeah.
servers are located, right? You don't have very great ping out in Hawaii, and that can attest to it. Even to this day, with broadband internet and everything, one of our schools in Hilo, their constant ping is like around 100 when they're playing every single day, and that's hardwired. That's not on Wi-Fi, right?
Yeah.
So it's a task. Needs a little bit of patience, but so I started. Playing black and white games, way back in the 90s, and then my first real big dive into competitive video games though was Diablo 2 and StarCraft, both Blizzard title.
Yeah.
Right. Blizzard was really, really big in esports before. I mean, Overwatch League has pretty much died out at this point. The player base is actually surging a little bit, but the professional league has died out. And but StarCraft, the original StarCraft, was amazing, and I was up on the leaderboards. I was like top 300 globally on StarCraft, and I was very, very competitive in that. And it wasn't that I wasn't physically active either. I was playing football, I was playing rugby, I was boxing and wrestling. I was an athlete.
Yeah.
At that time, and I was surfing, every day after school also. But video games was such a passion of mine, and it could have been just because I had a rough childhood. Like, I liked that escape from reality and kind of a way to put aside my problems, get into that fantasy world. But it was just so fun because it was also something that I was skilled in, something that I could like constantly look at myself and like, yeah, I'm better than X amount of other people. I'm a hyper competitive person, so that kind of just goes along with it. But I got into like League of Legends. I started playing 2012, so season 2, the end of season 2, and I loved it, but I was so busy at the time. I was a personal trainer with like NFL clients as my clients, so I was like constantly on the side just playing a couple of games every week with friends or whatnot. And all of my friends who got me into it, I eventually surpassed them in skill level and started to get
as
better.
that happens, of course.
Yeah, as that happens. So I started coaching people in 2017, because I was good. People were asking me to take them on as clients, coaching clients for video games, and I was like, sure, I'm coaching people in traditional sports. I might as well coach in this as well, and I found it really, really fun. And when I had my spinal surgeries, I forced into retirement for personal training, but I was like, what am I going to do with my life now? Like, I can't do anything physical at the moment or in the same capacity as I was. I was bedridden. I was in a wheelchair for a while. I mean, like, it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
So I was like, what am I going to do next? I don't want to go, like, I was a stock trader at one point. I didn't want to go back into that. I didn't want to do analysis. I didn't want to do any of these other things. I was like, what about esports? Like, I've been coaching. What if there's something that I could do alongside that? And I spoke to some of my family, and we were able to find the first program in the world, which is at Becker College in Massachusetts. And they offered a degree in esports. It was the first ever thing, and they had a very big culture around video game development and design anyway. They were the number 2 college in the world for video game design. So I was like, the culture is there. And my mom was living in Massachusetts at the time anyway, and so she's all like, "Yeah, come to Massachusetts." I regret that decision just because it's cold, and living in Hawaii most of my life. But went, and it was awesome. Even though I was the guinea pig, and it was throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what would stick and what would be. But the connections that I made through the program and the people that I've met, and also just ideating what I wanted to do with it. And that's where I came up with creating that organic pipeline and giving kids guidance where, looking back at my troubled childhood, what would change if I was given that guidance when I was young, when I was 12, 13, 14 years old instead of kind of just like feeling it out myself and being the jerk that I was when I was that age. I was a rebel. I was a troublemaker. I got in a lot of trouble. I was in a lockdown program when I was 15. Like, it was bad news. But if I was given some type of structure and some type of guidance, do the right thing, say the right thing, and kind of keep me on track and keep me accountable for my act, I probably would have been a lot further along, a lot faster. So that's where that's where Respawn Youth really comes in, is just being able to give back, being able to pay that forward and give a place of structure for kids to learn and grow.
Dude, that's awesome. Thank you for taking me through not just your esports journey, but like your life journey, right? That like gives you that purpose, right? And like just thinking, you went through some really hard times, right? But how much that you've allowed that to inform you on how can I use this in my life, right? How can I use this to impact kids? Because it's weird to think like I went through these hard times, right? And like, it's okay. Like I'm on the other side now, and I can help other people, go through, and walk through some of the things that I was going through, and they don't have to see those consequences. They have someone help them. That's amazing. And I think a lot of coaches can like resonate with that, right? I for myself, right? Like I got into League of Legends when I was 16. I had no idea what I was doing in terms of like how like my mindset should be for improving. I would like go to bed at like 8:30 because I was like tired, and then I'd wake up at like 2 a.m. and like try and like play a bunch of games before my parents like woke up and stuff. And like I thought that's like I would convince myself to get out of bed at 2 a.m. It's like, oh man, like if I'm ever going to be a pro, like I need to like put more games in, and I'm like grinding out silver. Like what am I doing at 2 a.m. playing silver games? But I didn't have like a coach to be like, no, that's not the right mindset, right? Like that, like you're not going to improve by just like grinding out games, like there are ways to improve yourself, far beyond just like out more games and things like that, right? And, I think, just life skills wise, right? Like, I probably, if I had a, guidance person there helping me, like you probably shouldn't be, getting 4 hours of sleep and trying to, track your sleep cycles so you can like still be okay in school. Like, like there's all these different things, and what's cool about like what we get to do as like coaches and like, youth impact people, right? Is like we get to help guide those kids. I can think of a few kids that I'm guiding right now in our program that are like, hey man, like, this is not how we act, or like, they might not know socially, like, certain things that are like okay or not okay, or how to like, navigate conversations or relationships with people. And it's like, I get to help those kids not make, mistakes or, think things are okay when they're not, and be outcast. And now they get included, and like, they've got friends, and like, they found a place, and like, they're growing as people. It's really awesome to see, And I'm also really glad that we get to do it in League of Legends now too. So that's really awesome, man. And getting, I don't want to speak for you, right? But like having such a dramatic change, in what you can do in your life, right, with your injury and stuff, and then I'm sure like, had that not happened, like, we're not making that impact, at this kid's level, at the kids level and stuff like that, in League of Legends and, in what you're all doing at Respawn Youth. And it's cool to see how like you've been able to just, take that in stride and like, change and adapt and like come out, positively on the other side of that. And I just want to say that's really, really awesome to see. And I'm so thankful that there's someone else out there, doing that and bringing that experience to them.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's definitely a passion project, and it's definitely, you always have to focus on the sense of gratitude of what you have instead of what you don't have, to be able to push forward. And that's one of the lessons that we hope to impart on the kids as well through some of the through some of the lessons that we do teach them. Just being able to kind of go and celebrate your wins instead of just mourn your losses.
For sure. Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, yeah. I definitely get that. And, I want to touch a little bit on, part of, what the ecosystem looks like right now. I mean, we're both on like the educator operator level of, like the ground floor of this stuff, right? Where do you see like, big gaps, or some might call opportunities, to elevate, specifically I'd say North America. That's our operating, area, right, within, esports. And I'm not just talking about League of Legends specifically, but just like in esports in general, I guess, where are you seeing like these gaps or opportunities that, either you guys want to fill or you hope someone comes in and fills because, you don't have enough time to do the whole thing, right? I guess I just want to see like, what's your perspective on where things are right now?
Yeah, I think one of my biggest gripes with the industry as a whole, and I'm talking about video games, competitive video games, esports, is the toxicity. Like really needing to change and elevate the atmosphere that everybody is enveloped by and participates in, right? And not celebrating or not, I guess, giving energy to when it is toxic, when it is super negative, because that builds on itself so quickly, right? The trending culture, or when like just a word that comes to mind is like cancel culture type of deal, when it's kind of like repeats over and over again. And people, but that you can see that through all of history, where people kind of jump on a trend, even if it's not nice, even if it's not like uplifting for anybody, people just jump on it anyway because they want to be cool, or they want to fit in. Whatever. Exactly. And so I think not giving energy to that toxicity and that negativity is going to be something that we have to focus on, because that also is that ostracizing factor, is that like repelling people outside of it. I mean, it's, we see it in a lot of youth programs where there's not as many girls who want to be, in these programs because they think it's like a boys club, right? Or they think it's like, because they get told to, some really nasty things, and I'm not going to repeat here because I don't want to give energy to it.
Right.
But we need to start reprimanding or like not encouraging that type of behavior. And it's not encouraging; it actually has to be posed. So I think that's one of the gaps, is being able to teach kids from an earlier stage in life that that's not okay, and it's not okay to just be nasty for no reason to other.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear that, and that's, speaking to it from like the parents' perspective, right? When we interact with parents, right? It's, they don't understand esports, they don't understand gaming, right? And so what they're going to see is what, is posted online the most, or what gets the most attention, right? Which is that toxicity, or, the different things that come out that are unsafe, or, like all these different scenarios that are like, why would I want my kid to be part of something like that, right? And for the kids who are in it, right, what are they seeing as this gets me reward, right? And attention or views or, whatever, right? Like, I remember we have one kid who like, he thought he was like a professional rage baiter. Like that's literally what he called himself. It's like, dude, like, why do we feel like this is what we need to be, right? This is not how we act here, right? And there's no reason to be causing, all this like commotion for no reason. Like why are we identifying ourselves in that sense, with what we do, at the esports level, right? And how should we approach people? Like, something that I think is great, like in traditional sports, is the coaching infrastructure, right? The amount of coaches that are out there in middle school, elementary, high school, right, college, like who are there not to just make them better, football players or track runners or whatever, right? Like it's about the person, not the player, And I think the best coaches, the most respected coaches, the coaches that have the most success are the ones who coach the people, right? And the ones who, develop the best like character people, right? And I think, I love sports. I'm a football guy, college football guy, and I think you can see that a lot with, people like, like Nick Saban, right? Like he was coaching to like the people, like, no, like, I want to set them up for success after, life in football, right? Or, like, because not all of his players are going to the NFL. A lot of them did, but, like you still need to show up, right? Like you need to put in the work and stuff like that. You need to do your job, right? That's a Bill Belichick thing, like do your job, like, and it's teaching those life skills, right? And I think that's something so special about sports and esports, is that we get to teach life skills through gaming, right? And like, I definitely see that as like, yeah, we need to make sure we're not giving noise or attention to the things that set us back as an industry, as, you know, set us back as how people view us, as a general audience who doesn't know much about gaming or esports. So I definitely resonate with that.
And touching on that point and bringing in, I guess, full circle, something that you mentioned before is intentionality behind it as well. Like you getting up at 2 a.m. to grind silver games. You know, there's nothing wrong with that in one sense, but there's everything wrong with that in another.
Yeah.
And it's the conversation that I was having with Arthur, the CEO of Gen G, recently as well, and kind of the contrast between the youth here in the U.S. In North America, and opposed to the youth in South Korea and the academies that they actually have to coach gaming and teach gaming, and intentionality goes a long way there. Yeah. And it's kind of what you were talking about with coaching sports as well. Like, video games is something that is accessible to basically everybody that has an internet connection at any point.
Yeah.
But how many of those people actually learn positive, healthy habits or good habits, whether it's personal wise, like outside of the game, or whether it's in the game? Both sides of it make a difference.
Yep.
But how many people learn those habits early on, or are consistent with them, or intentional when they get on why they would be doing something, right? How many of them reflect on the game that they had just played and reflect on the mistakes that they made and how to improve, or who's holding them accountable, or what they're saying through the chat? Like, League is pretty infamous for being a toxic community in the chat. You know, that drives some people away, but it's also has created that negative stigma in the eyes of the administration. It's like, we partner with schools. We are a STEM accredited class, so we actually act as a class period during the day, and it takes a long, sometimes grueling process to be able to allow the administration, who are normally a little bit older or not in the same generation at least that had video games commonplace, to understand how video games can be used as a growing activity or as a learning activity. And I relate League of Legends specifically, but a lot of video games, but League of Legends specifically to chess. How many parents do you think would say, "Oh, I don't want my kid playing chess"?
Like, none of them. They all want them to play chess. Yeah.
They all want them to be on the chess team at their school, right? Or, but chess inherently, it is a war game. Chess is a war game. It is a strategy game about war. It's about taking the other pieces, about being able to strategize on where you're going to be placing pieces given their move set to be able to conquer the other person. And that, I mean, if we look at, because they all say video games are violence or inspires or, encourages violence, but that's not the case. And there have been plenty of different reports that kind of contradict that. But when we're talking about it, is like, if you're looking at it from the lens of if you're learning fiscal responsibility, if you're learning critical thinking, if you're learning proprioception, where you are in space and time, and what those skill sets are. Like, there's so many different things that you can learn through strategy games like League of Legends that kids these days aren't learning through other media. They're not learning through different, and they're not taking, like, a lot of them are not enrolled in leadership courses. A lot of them are not enrolled in communication courses outside of just their friend groups and whatnot. So, and especially going through COVID, you have this entire generation now that spent 3 years behind a computer screen and not interacting with other people, right? And a lot of the time behind masks as well, so they don't know how to interact or be socially warm and friendly with other people in the same way. They don't know the same type of interaction. And it's what a couple of middle school administrators have talked to me recently about, is some of them have been a little bit more violent or physically, interacting with other students because they just don't understand, like, that separation. And so how do we reintroduce those social cues? How do we reintroduce that ability to communicate and interact with other people in a manner that is conducive, that is encouraging positive behavior or encouraging positive interaction?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think thinking about all those things, like you getting to talk to administrators, right, and like they see these problems or they have these hesitations, right, and something that we get a lot, with parents, is like screen time, violence. Are we are we just paying for them to, play games? Like they play games at home? Like what problem are we solving here by signing them up for these things, right? And it's so awesome that I can just flip the coin and be like, guys, the issues or the drawbacks that you think like you're seeing, right? This is the answer to it, right? Because, if you have a problem with screen time, right? Like they're playing at home already, right? So why would you not want their dedicated screen time to be used in a positive way, right? Like guided way. Like at home, yeah, you've got, little Jimmy playing on the couch, playing Fortnite and screaming at the TV. And it's like, he's been on there for 4 hours. Okay. You're not just paying for us to watch, little Jimmy scream at the TV for 4 hours here, right? You're paying for him to like understand, like, how to positively approach these situations, right? How do we interact with a kid next to you who is playing Fortnite with you, who just beat you? Like, how do you interact with that person, right? For administrators, right? Like the violence thing, I think chess is a perfect example of, like this is literally like a war game, Now it's not like visibly violent or anything, right? But you're learning, risk versus reward, trading things off, right? Games like League of Legends that are so complex, not just because there's 170 characters, but just the way the game plays, like, am I trading things around the map? Like, how are we, finding advantages, that aren't inherently there for us, planning out ahead, right? And we've got to plan out for a couple of minutes before an objective, right? So what are we all doing? How are we communicating? What are our roles, right? What am I accountable for versus someone else on the team accountable for, right? How am I holding my teammates accountable for this, right? How am I holding the other team accountable for what they should be doing, right? These are all things that like people are not learning by just like scrolling social media or even just playing that exact same game at home by themselves, right? It takes someone to say like, this is what you need to be, looking at. This is how you should be approaching this because, I can be throwing a football in the parking lot, with my, friends and not learning like how to actually throw a proper spiral or, coming up with like developing plays or, like communicating like what we should be doing as like a team. I grew up playing soccer, right? And I was a center back. So I had a full view of the field, right? And I'm like, yelling the whole time, not in anger, but like I'm kind of like playing the like FIFA almost like with my team because I'm telling them where they need to go, how they need to spread the field, we need to be going deep, like, we need to be dropping back. Someone help this guy, like he's trapped out there, These are all things that like parents love about sports, right? These are all things like they want to see their kid in a leadership role. They want to see them, like creatively thinking. They want to see them socializing, right? And not all kids are going to be geared towards sports, right? There's the classic like, kid who's playing football because like his dad wants him to play football and he hates football, right? Like all he wants to do is, not be in football or whatever, there's just kids who aren't physically able to be in sports, right? And, I think what's so great about esports is anyone, like you said, anyone who has an internet connection can access it, right? And they can learn all of these amazing life lessons. Most parents, if they're honest with themselves, they don't sign their kid up for sports because they want them to burn calories. Now, sometimes you do want them to go run and wear themselves out so they fall asleep, but that's not the primary reason you're signing your kid up for sports, right? You're signing them up because they want their kid to learn how to be a good teammate. They want them to learn these life skills and socialization, right? Esports does all of that, and I think it's so rewarding to see parents like who kind of come in very skeptical, right? And then like, for whatever reason, they take that jump, right? They're like, all right, I'll give it a shot. Like I'll give my kid a shot. And then, a month later, like, this is amazing. Like my kid is, coming back to me and he's telling me about how his games went, like, I don't know what he did in Fortnite, but he's communicating with me about these things. He's telling me about his teammates, he's talking about his coaches and like what they learned today, and he's getting on at home, no longer screaming at the TV, but like, he's not even playing the actual game. He's like in a practice map, like, cause he wants to get better, and like, these are all things that you can just apply to like real life, the lessons that we learn, in esports, you know, that you would learn in traditional sports as well. You know, like these are special things that, you know, it's so awesome to like flip the coin and be like, no guys, all your concerns, this is actually the answer to those concerns, you know? And I think that that's just something that's amazing that we get to do, you know, on a daily basis, you know, here at XP League, you know, with parents, but with you guys and administrators. I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is that special sense that you don't exactly know how you're going to influence either one of the kids or their relationship with the parents, which is so cool. And as you were talking about, like the inclusion, you every single person could be included. It doesn't matter your race, your gender, like people with disabilities. There's ways that you can work around it. We actually have a kid who just came in who can only use his left hand.
Wow.
So, you know, where we got him a left-handed mouse with the buttons on the side of the Naga, the Razer Naga.
Yeah.
Left-handed Razer Naga, so he can, you know, put all of the macros on the mouse and still do everything that all the other kids do. And he loves it. He's getting super involved. And but what really came to mind when you were just talking about, you know, the parents, talking to the parents, we had one kid in particular who is homeschooled, and his mom had a problem with him always gaming. And this is before he started the program, but always gaming, and he would never come down to the dinner table and have dinner with them or talk to them. And we implemented something about having accountability partners. So we you know, put two kids together and they have their homework to do together in the game and everything, and play games together and reflect off of something that the other person did instead of what they did. Yeah. So they constantly have to be giving constructive feedback and criticism to the other person, their accountability partner. And the mom took me to the side and said, this is the most amazing thing that has changed his life. Like he came down last week to the dinner table and was just reveling in all of the things that he was learning and talking about his accountability partner and talking about this that he learned in the game and that he learned in the game and how it changed the way that he looked at something. And it was the first time that he had shared this experience with his mom, and his mom was like in tears, basically crying about it. And I was like, this is so cool, because it's like, if I can just shift that trajectory of a kid's life, just a small amount, something more positive, to something more beneficial, to building that relationship with their parents if they're disconnected. I mean, like, again, reflecting on my own life and looking back when I didn't talk to my mom for 7 years. I spent no more than like 2 days, 3 days with my dad in over 16 years.
Wow.
And so being able to have kids connect with their parents and being able to share that common place. And the mom now is like, she got her own jersey that matches, awesome. Like to celebrate. She brings in, all the events. She's like screaming in the Twitch chat, or in the live events. She has like a fan signs made and everything. Yeah. It's such a cool experience.
Yeah, that is so awesome. And man, I just want to touch on that parent aspect of it, because I got to see it like firsthand for my League of Legends kids whenever we joined y'all last weekend for the Cryo Cup. Our league kids, we don't have like a structured league, within XP League, and now that we're part of the Holland system as well, they don't have one either, right? And so, all the tournaments we've played in have just been clashes and stuff that are like in the league client. And when they found out that they were invited to a youth only like specific tournament, I mean, they were so excited. Like they didn't care if like, someone was about to be like 5 teams of challenger players. Like they were just so excited to go out there and prove themselves. And what was awesome was it wasn't just the kids, like the parents were so excited. They were like asking me like, is this going to be streamed? Like, like this kid's, aunt and uncle want to watch and stuff. Like they, after every game, like, is their next game going to be streamed? I'm like, yes guys, like the entire, all their gameplay is going to get streamed and casted, and like, you're going to get to see them play. And, we had 3 parents. I've got 5 kids. 4 of them are in person. 1's remote. 3 of the in-person parents brought like full trays of snacks for the kids, because we're like, we're going to be here for, a while, right? We got the best of 3, and, we've got a game at the beginning, right? So like, we're going to be here for a while. I mean, they bought 3 full snack trays, like 2 Costco pizzas, like 12 or 13 different Gatorades. Like they were so ready to support their kid, which was awesome. Like one of those kids, came in like that really kicked off our league program. He had never played league before. Like it was one of my wife's kids, she's a teacher. And so this kid wanted to come in and learn how to play league. And I was like, all right, we'll build a league program, and now we got like a full team. And like the parents were just so ready to watch, and well, speaking to that, like as well, like this same group of parents, and the kids, we had the LCS finals in Dallas, or LTA finals in Dallas this past September, I think. Yeah, September or end of August. And we went as a group. Like we had our kids there, and part of the requirement for the kid to be there was your parents got to come too, because Coach Greg doesn't want to watch you for 6 hours, but your parents are going to get to come and experience, and getting to sit there with the parents and their kid is explaining to them what's going on. And the parents are asking questions about it and figuring it out and translating it, real time for themselves. Like this is the first time they're getting to see it and see the professional side of it. And, all of that, like it's so special, that we get to do that, and that there are parents out there that are like, yeah, I'm going to take that leap, to see if this is what helps my kid, and I'm sure we've got a million stories like that with all the different kids that we've gotten to impact and coach, and like the parents we've gotten to speak to. It really is just something so incredible, and I'm sure we could go on about this for forever, but I want to kind of take like a step into like a broader view, we're doing that, right? You're doing that, with Respawn, there's Valhallans and stuff out there, high schools are starting to get involved, What do you see as like, man, if we're going to like make this thing happen, in youth esports, like what do you see as like, this needs to happen, to get us to the level that other sports in the, at least the US are, like what does that jump look like?
Yeah, and I don't know if there's any one particular solution to it. I think that there's a lot of traditional sports was built over decades and decades to get to the space that it is now, where they have the not just the sponsors but the networks, completely taking over. And the interesting difference between traditional sports and esports, though, is esports, each one of the titles is owned by a singular IP, right? Mm-hmm. Is owned by the developer. And so at any given moment, they can just take it away or not let somebody, partake in it. And that's the interesting dynamic that you have in esports as a whole, because as we saw with Generation Esports, High School Esports League with League of Legends in the past, right, that is something that happened. So, there has to be some type of commonplace. There has to be some type of agreement or, something that cements it into place where it isn't just that on the flip of a dime, it can change. Yeah. And that's a conversation to be had, obviously, on both sides with the organizations that are doing the youth esports and grassroots efforts, and then the developers. But I think that there has to be an overall change just on the mindset around video games as well. Like I was saying about the negative stigma that's out there, I think that more people need to, one, understand what esports is and understand how esports can help in education. We published an academic report last year about how esports ties into education, and we've been sharing that with schools. And there's less than 10% of schools that have an esports program out there, even though there's over 200 colleges just in the US alone that offer esports scholarships and programming, right? So there's a disconnect somewhere there where we as a community, as society, still look at esports or video games strictly as entertainment instead of something more. And if we can't associate the same thing with esports as we do with traditional sports, where traditional sports is not just entertainment. Yes, it fits into entertainment, but it is also all of these other things. It is exercise, it is training, it is leadership, it is developing you and developing the person, developing character. So as long as we keep disassociating esports with that, I don't think that there is going to be much movement in that space, or on the larger scale. So I think that part of our charge, Greg, you and my charge at least, and the people who are working in the same space, to be able to start to move that conversation forward and to start to just open up dialogue with some of these people who are vehemently opposed to it and say,
Right.
why? Like, what is your reasoning behind it? And maybe I could change your mind with some specific examples.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And, I think you hit it like right on the head, like, just that narrative, right? It needs to change of like what we are, like what gaming is, what esports is. It's not just a media product, right? We talk of like, yes, the LCS and, VCT, those are entertainment products, right? That's what they're there for, right? That's the entertainment product. Same as the NFL, like, they are an entertainment sports like media company, right? They're not a football company, they're a sports entertainment media company, and I think, just like how do we perceive that? What are the messages that are getting sent out there, right? Like, are they the positive messages, like you said, earlier in the podcast? Like, what are the messages that are being sent out there? And for me, when I discovered esports, right? Like, I didn't discover League of Legends and then found out about LCS. I found out about LCS first. That's how I like got drug into it. And the team that like I put my roots down in and all my hopes and dreams in was Echo Fox. And if you know about Echo Fox, they're no longer around. But Echo Fox, their founder, Rick Fox, who came from traditional sports, he was an LA Laker. He won multiple NBA championships with the Lakers, right? He was on a mission to change that narrative, right? And unfortunately, the esports industry chewed him up and spit him back out and gave him, no thanks on the way out, right? And that sucks, because he was such a champion for like, this is real, like this is providing the same stuff that sports provides. These are athletes, right? They're learning, they're developing, they're putting all this effort into what they're doing, right? And it's not just kids in some mom's basement, like, you playing video games. That's what my mom always said, was like, these are a bunch of 30-year-old people, with greasy hair in flannel pajamas in their mom's basement. Like, yeah, they're basement dwellers. I'm like, Mom, this is not how it actually is, And I think that's part of what drives me to do what I do. But, like, it's so sad that we had someone who was, from the sports world that bringing that in. I'm not talking about like all these sports execs who are investing and, coming in, because they're coming in from that media entertainment product side of it, right? It's about that grassroots and that growth, from the foundation up. And I think what's important to recognize is what you said right at the beginning of that, right? Is sports as we know it, like, it developed over decades, right? It wasn't like all of a sudden every single high school had a football program. They all had head coaches and, assistant coaches and trainers and all of that, right? Like, way back in the day when, whoever decided to, throw pigskin and, put a leather cap on and, people were dying left and right. Like, not every high school was like, I'm going to put that, into our program now, right? And same with like the NBA, like, it took a long time to get to where it is, right? And like, even, like, it had its eras and stuff. And, I think, unfortunately, esports was on that same track, right? It was on that track. It was a grassroots, you said, like, you started with like StarCraft and Brood War and, all of that, right? Like, it took a while. And then, man, all of a sudden, those people, at the top of all these, sports, areas, they're like, oh, like, I see the similarities, which is awesome, right? But they're like, well, we need it to be like what we have now, right? Or we're gonna get in like now, and we're gonna like just pump it up until it's like it's the next NBA in 10 years, right? And it's like, guys, that's not how your NBA product got to where it was. Like, it didn't just
the entire build phase.
Right. Yes. Yeah, we're in the build phase, guys. Like, this is what the podcast is for, So, I appreciate you calling that out too. Is like, guys, it's like, it's like slowly gonna go up, right? But it takes like the foundations, the roots to build that. And I think, you see that in Korea, right? They're their system works a lot differently than how it works here in the US. And I mean, same with Europe, but you know, in the US, right? Like if you're going to get into professionals, you got to, you know, go through college right now. A lot of NBA players, they play 1 year and go, and, you know, all of that whole landscape's changing a little bit, but it still goes through the colleges, which is so important that, I mean, you mentioned it, over 200 college scholarships, right? You know, colleges have scholarships for esports. Like, guys, the higher education pieces that actually helped build up what, you know, the professional landscape is now for, you know, traditional sports, right? They're the ones saying like, hey, we're going to put money into this. Like, we want, you know, this to be valuable, you know, in our institutions, right? And that's going to create value on the end. And I think, you know, when I look at it, like, I think the collegiate adoption is so important for the United States, or like, you know, this like North America, because that's like all of our parents, like, they saw as like college is like that's the path, you know, like you get a college degree, like you're going to be successful, right? You know, which people can have their own arguments about that, right? But, you know, if you're thinking about traditional sports, like, you got to get through college. Not everyone's going to be Kobe, you know, like, you know, going straight from high school and stuff, right? Now in esports, that is like very common, right? Like, you've got like 15-year-old Rocket League players like coming out and dominating, literally winning world championships, right? Like, they're the best players in the world. And I think that works right now, you know, but, you know, if we're going to like actually like, it's not like we shouldn't have the win now mentality, right? For people, like, we need to develop them as players. And I think League of Legends is just like one of the most perfect examples of this. You've got this guy Faker who came in, 17-year-old. I think he was 17 when he first won Worlds, or he might have been 16,
16, 17,
one of the two. Yeah, one of those two, and came out and just best player in the world, hands down. Like, mechanically, like, no one's going to touch this guy, right? And then people caught up, and then he had this drought, and he is no longer what he was, right? You know, mechanically, but he's so like well-rounded. I mean, he's won the last 3 world championships in a row, something he couldn't even do whenever he was, you know,
at the top of his game.
At the top of his game mechanically, right? And, you know, he's developed himself into like this longevity that we haven't seen in esports. You know, most people, you know, we were talking before this, like, yeah, we're, you know, we're grandpas. Like, I mean, you know, you're older than me, but like, I'm Unc too, you know, like, like, I got grandpa hands over here, like, you know, and I'm 26, you know, like, but like, what you're going to see is like that development. Like, if we can develop players, you know, to be successful in the long term, like, you're going to see an improvement, you know, more. And like I said, like we just said, Faker's been more successful in a time where there are so many more players significantly better than him mechanically, and the entire world is just like, if you take, you know, like a middling, you know, Korean team, or even a bottom Korean team now, and put them back when he first joined, I mean, they would probably get absolutely destroyed. Right? Because like the knowledge gap is like caught up, right? And I mean, you can say that about like traditional sports, like, you know, if you take LeBron back to whatever era, and, you know, any, you know, middling player from the NBA today, you know, like, you're putting back there, oh, it's going to be different, right? I don't want to get into that because I'm not Stephen A or anyone like that, but you know, like. Yeah, like,
they always have that comparison between like LeBron now versus, you know, Jordan back in the day.
Right, like, yeah. It's guys, it's 2 different eras. But, you know, what I think is important to draw this back is, you know, like, with colleges and stuff, like, man, that is the path for so many people to success in life, right? And if you can get there through esports and developing yourself just as someone else in traditional sports could, like, why would we hinder that? Why would we not see that as the solution, you know, to better people, right? But, you know, man, at some point that's going to flip, and that is going to be our base for our pros, you know, coming out of North America, you know, into whatever games, right? You know, that's going to be our flip. And, you know, the reason I say that is I think, you know, that's just the path that traditional sports took, right? And at some point, we're going to start seeing the longevity of these players in esports, and it's going to flip to where, man, you got to be more well-rounded. You can't just, like, you know, hands diff someone in these games, right? You know, and I don't know. I think we're going to see that change, and so I'm really happy to hear that a lot of colleges are putting out scholarships and stuff like that. Because, man, my alma mater, I'm from Texas A&M, and we have a esports club that is amazing. We literally won collegiate VCT, I think, 2 years ago, and we have $0 from Texas A&M, who has, I believe, the most valuable or most profitable college football program in the country. So to see that we can do so much with so little, man, I'm just waiting for them to like flip the, hey guys, we got a little bit of money. Like our players have to play off campus. Like they're playing at home with Spectrum internet and stuff, which I don't know, man. Yeah, I devolve from there on my own rant. I'll find someone at A&M to come on the podcast and start ranting to them about it. But like it's yeah.
There's two things there also. I mean, like just in general, we call it CCL now. It's Career Connect, and there's been a big push in middle schools and high school for that specifically, in kind of like synonymous with CTE, right? But it's just making sure that kids have the skills, both soft and technical skills, to go forward with confidence into career, into college, and then career, or just career if they want to skip college. Completely okay as well.
Yeah, that's not everyone's path. Yeah.
One thing that I did want to mention, though, that I forgot to interject when you were talking about it, is Rick Fox, though.
Yeah.
When Echo Fox was created as well, the drive with Rick Fox, I mean, he did such great work for the industry as a whole, and especially specifically for LCS. But the reason why he did it as well, his connection with his son, and his son's interest in League of Legends, and his son's interest in esports as a whole, was why Rick got so involved and is like, yeah, I'm investing in my son. I'm investing in, like, I want to be connected with him and what he's interested in as well. Yeah. And that was so touching to me, is like, my dad never showed interest in anything that I wanted to do when I was younger. Didn't like me playing video games, didn't like me doing any contact sports. I played football, I played rugby, I was a boxer, I did wrestling. And he was a tennis player, and I respect him for that. And it was great. I go out and play tennis with him now. He's a lot older now, but when I do get to see him, he's still out in Hawaii. So when I do get to see him, I play tennis with him, and it's great that he has his thing. But it's so heartwarming to see a parent investing in what their kid wants to do and what their kid is interested in, instead of forcing them into doing something else. And so when you mentioned Rick Fox, is like that is always kind of like brings me to tears as well, is like how invested he was, and how much he was like, I don't care if it's going to make me lose money. I don't care if it's going to, if it's not a worthwhile investment. This is something that my son is really interested in. And I want to go all in.
Yeah, dude. And to that point, man, like he was such a great champion for what we get to do, and like knowing he got into it because his son like was into it. I remember like stories of them like going and meeting CLG before they won in Madison Square Garden and stuff, and like his son getting introduced there and stuff. And it's just it's amazing. It's such a shame that we've lost him from our industry and stuff, but man, seeing parents like invest in their kids and that interest, and like I see it, every day here when I've got, parents coming in and they're here to watch their kids' games, and, like they're bringing pizza for everyone, and like, they're friends, and like they bring friends, like they're like recruiting for ourselves, like it's amazing. And I think, man, when I first got started on this esports journey, and we'll close out here in a minute, but, something that like I was like, this is what I want to do, right? This is what I want to do. It was my first ever live esports experience. It was the 2022 Spring LCS Finals in Houston, Texas. So I'm from Houston. I'm a Texans fan. It was at NRG Stadium, which is awesome. And I got to go to that finals, and man, I just happened to be an EG fan. Echo Fox was gone. Happened to be an EG fan. One of like 10 of us in there, going to day one. And when they won that final, and I got to see Danny, who, by the way, he has his own, things that he had to go through and that he deals with, on a personal level, and seeing him go there, win LCS, and his family was there, and like they were supportive, and he was going through a lot of stuff behind the scenes, and a lot of unfortunate things, but to see his parents there and talking about how proud they were of him and like supporting him, and dude, man, I was like, I left the venue and like I was listening to like some of the interviews on the way home, and I was literally like crying on the way home. Like it was awesome to see, like it was so touching, right? And I do point to that as like not necessarily that specific example, but that like event as like, man, this is what I want to do like with my life. I want to make an impact, on this. And, I didn't know what that path was going to look like. Right. But, that was such a cool experience. And to tie that into like, I get to do that every day and like see that every day is like, man, it does bring you to tears sometimes when you like really take a look at it and think about it. And so, well, I know we've been going for, I think, almost an hour. I don't know the exact time, but I did want to leave the last little part open for anything that you wanted to, speak to that we didn't get to, or any topic you want to jump into, or anything that we kind of touched and haven't gotten to finish out your thoughts on.
Well, I've got ADHD brain, so it's like I'm all over the place anyway. I appreciate you reeling me in these couple of times throughout. I don't have anything specific on mind. Sure. I think this is, I love having these conversations. Greg, you're an awesome guy as well. Our conversations before this. Mm-hmm. So I'm just happy to be able to be here building something with you, being in this build phase with you.
Build phase, man. We're here. Well, Tao, thank you so much for coming on and having such a great and fruitful conversation, man. Like, we love what y'all are doing at Respawn. Like, we're waiting for that next tournament. One of those parents was asking me like, hey, do we have anything on like this day? Because like I'm trying to plan around, and I was like, I don't think we've got anything yet. But man, it's been so awesome getting to know you, getting to know what you guys do over at Respawn, why you do it, getting to see that background of, what's led you here event wise, but just like what's pushed you, in your life to do what you do has been really awesome. And before we close, just let us know, like, where should the audience be able to find you? Like, where can they find you? Where can they find more information about Respawn? How can they support you and your mission?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website, respawnYouth.com, is all the information for parents, administrators, school programs, or after-school programs. And if you're a student who's looking to get involved and you don't have a place nearby, if you don't have XP League that's right next to you to be able to go in person, we do offer what's called Respawn Direct, which is students who are not associated with a school or an after-school program who want to come in and be a part of it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Again, Tao, thank you so much for coming on. Please check out his stuff. Connect with him on LinkedIn. Go to Respawn Youth. Like, push that out there to y'all's networks. Like, he is such an integral piece to what the build phase is, like where we are in the esports industry and like where we're going as an industry, right? We got to build that foundation, and man, Respawn, I know, is going to be at the center of that. I know what like y'all are putting, your heart and souls into it, and being part of the Esports Trade Association, being part of this, podcast, man, like it's so awesome, the platform that we're getting to build and the lives that we're getting to touch through all these different avenues. And if you want to learn more about ESTA, please go to the ESTA website, find us on LinkedIn, get into one of our coffee connections, getting to meet amazing people like Tao. I'm pretty sure you were on the last one with Megan. And it's such a great way to get connected, guys. If you want to make an impact on the esports industry, get involved with us at ESTA, get involved. I would love to have more guests like Tao on this podcast to show, what part are they playing in the build phase? What role are they, in this team in the esports industry? So please go check out us on all of our socials. And yeah, just look forward to the next podcast. I got a couple guests lined up that I think y'all are going to really love. But again, Tao, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone watching, and we will catch y'all next time on the Build Phase podcast.